Wyoming Territory, June 1877. The sun was just breaking past the foothills when the cowboy spotted her, a woman in a torn dress, barefoot, clutching a bundled baby tight against her chest as she stumbled down the wagon trail, eyes red, face streaked with dust and tears. Jasper Nolan pulled back on his reins. His horse, a steel-gray gelding named Flint, let out a soft huff as they came to a halt. Jasper's hand went to the rifle slung across his saddle out of habit, but he could see right away she was no threat. She looked ready to fall apart. "Ma'am," he called, voice low, careful. "You need help?" She stopped like she had not heard a human voice in days. Her head turned so slow it made his chest ache. Her eyes locked on his, wild, wet, afraid, and then she crumpled to her knees in the dirt, the baby still clutched tight in her arms. Jasper was off his horse in a heartbeat. When he reached her, she was shaking, shoulders hunched like she expected a blow. The baby, could not be more than a few months old, let out a soft, fussy cry. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. "Please. I just need to keep her safe." "You got no trouble with me," Jasper said quietly. He knelt beside her, not touching, just letting her see he meant what he said. "My name's Jasper Nolan. I got a cabin about a mile west, got food, water, a safe roof. You and your baby can rest there." She blinked hard, breathing heavy like she was still deciding if she could trust him. Then she looked down at the baby, her arms tightening just a little before her eyes met his. "I do not care whose baby it is," Jasper said gently, steady as the rising sun. "Just let me love you both." Her breath caught. She stared like she could not believe what she heard. Jasper stayed right there, not moving, just watching her with those calm blue eyes of his. The baby fussed again, louder now, and she looked down, gently rocking the bundle. After a long pause, she gave a tiny nod. "I'm Fallon Hayes," she said, voice breaking. "This is Grace." Jasper helped her stand, careful of her trembling arms. He lifted her up onto Flint's saddle and held Grace while she settled. The baby was warm and tiny against his chest, and something inside him clicked into place the second her little hand grasped at his shirt. He led them both back to his cabin. The ride was quiet, save for the creak of the saddle and the soft whimpers of Grace. Fallon stayed silent, holding tight to the horn of the saddle, her eyes scanning the trees like she expected someone to come bursting out at any second. Jasper kept close. He had built the cabin himself 3 winters ago, after leaving cattle driving behind. There was a corral, a small barn, and a lean-to for firewood. The cabin sat nestled against a stand of pines, far enough from town that nobody came out unless they meant to. He helped her down and carried Grace inside. The cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. There was a warm hearth and a table with 2 chairs, and a cot in the corner that he never used much. He laid Grace on a folded blanket and turned to see Fallon standing just inside the door, her arms crossed over her chest like she needed to hold herself together. "You all right?" he asked. She gave a weak nod. He poured water from the basin and handed her the cup. "You can wash up too," he said. "There's stew on the fire. Was not expecting company, but it'll do." She drank, hands shaking. Later, after she ate and cleaned up, she sat on the edge of the cot with Grace in her lap, brushing her fingers through the baby's soft hair. Jasper sat across the room, giving her space. "Where's her father?" he asked, quiet, her lips pressed into a line. "Gone," she said. "Was never really here. He left before she was born. I was staying with a cousin in Cheyenne for a while, but when I had her, they said I could not stay. Said she was not their problem." Jasper's jaw tightened. "I tried to find work in town," she went on, "but nobody wants a stranger with a baby. So I started walking." "How long have you been out there?" 3 days. Jasper stood, walked over, sat beside her, not too close but close enough she could feel him there. "Well," he said, "you are not walking anymore. She looked at him, eyes full of disbelief. "I do not care whose baby it is," he said again. "You both belong here now if that is what you want." Fallon looked down. Grace blinked up at her, peaceful now, nestled in the crook of her arm. "You do not even know me. I know what it looks like when someone is running scared. I know what it means to fight for someone smaller than you." A long silence stretched between them. Then Fallon leaned just a little, her shoulder brushing his. "I do not have anywhere else," she whispered. "Then this is home," he said. That first night, Fallon slept on the cot with Grace in her arms. Jasper took the chair by the fire, his rifle leaning against the wall just in case. He did not sleep much. Every time the baby stirred, he was half up. Fallon too. They were worn thin, both of them, but something about the quiet rhythm of the fire and the slow breathing of mother and child settled him. In the morning, he made coffee and eggs. Fallon came to the table with Grace in her arms and sat across from him. Her hair was brushed now, her face washed, and though the shadows under her eyes were still deep, there was a softness there he had not seen the day before. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I am." She looked down at Grace, then back up at him. "I do not want charity." "This is not charity," he said. "This is me saying I want you here, both of you." Fallon looked at him a long time like she was trying to read his soul, and Jasper let her. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "Then I guess we start from here." He smiled, slow and warm. "Yeah," he said. "We do." The wind carried the scent of pine and sun-warmed earth as Jasper set the fence post deeper into the ground, his shoulders working slow and steady. Fallon stood a few yards off, her skirts brushing the tall grass, Grace tucked in a sling across her chest. She was watching the sky, one hand shading her eyes, her posture easier than the day before, though her fingers still clutched the cloth strapped tight. "Do the winters come early out here?" she asked, not turning her head. "Some years. Snows come as early as October," Jasper said, straightening. He brushed dirt from his palms. "But there's time yet." "Why?" "I was thinking about planting something," she said. "Not much, just some beans or carrots. Something to keep us fed if towns too far come cold." Jasper nodded. "Soil's good near the creek. Gets sun most the day. I can show you after supper." She glanced over then, her mouth lifting a little in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You always this agreeable?" "No," he said. "But I figure a woman offering to plant carrots in your yard with a baby strapped to her chest's a fair reason to be." Fallon let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Grace stirred, letting out a soft noise, and Fallon adjusted the sling gently, her motions practiced. Jasper walked over, nodding toward the tool shed near the barn. "There's an old spade in there, probably needs sharpening. I can see to it if you want to start clearing." Fallon hesitated, then followed him, her boots brushing through the dust. "You built all this?" "Mostly." "Got help with the chimney?" "Everything else barn, corral, cabin that was me." "Why?" "Got tired of sleeping on the trail. Cattle work wears a man down after a while. I wanted quiet." She looked around, her gaze pausing on the mountains in the distance. "You got it?" "Yeah," he said. "But quiet's different from lonely." They reached the shed. Jasper stepped inside, rummaged past a coil of rope and a stack of old feed sacks, and pulled out the spade. The edge was dull, the wood handle worn to a smooth sheen. He handed it to her. Fallon took it, testing the weight. "I used to help my mother in the garden back in Kansas. She'd wake us before the sun was up, have us out there pulling weeds while the dew was still on the leaves. You miss her. She died last spring. Fever." He didn't say he was sorry. She didn't look like she wanted that. Instead, he asked, "You got any kin left?" "One brother. Fisher. Last I heard he was headed toward Missouri. Never wrote, though. Might be gone by now." She didn't say it with bitterness, just plain fact. "Then you've got us now," Jasper said. She looked at him, eyes steady. You mean that? I wouldn't have said it if I didn't. Fallon gripped the spade a little tighter. All right. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped behind a bank of clouds and the air had cooled just enough to make the work bearable. Fallon knelt in the dirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the sling now empty and looped around her waist. Grace lay on a folded blanket in the shade of a nearby cottonwood, cooing softly to herself. Jasper watched from the porch, whittling a strip of pine. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He just let her work, let her settle her own bones into the land. When she straightened to stretch her back, he offered her a tin cup of water. "Thanks," she said, drinking deep. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You watching to see if I know what I'm doing?" "No," he said. "Just watching." Fallon raised an eyebrow. "You always this quiet," he shrugged. "Talking's easy, listening's rarer." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "That's true." Grace let out a louder cry then, and Fallon was across the yard before Jasper had time to move. She scooped the baby up, checking her with quick, confident hands, then cradled her against her shoulder. "She's warm," Fallon murmured. "Might be the sun. I'll keep her in after this." "You need anything for her?" "Cloth and lye soap, mostly." "She's growing fast." "I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said. "You make me a list." "You trust me with your coin already." He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "You've got my shovel. Trust don't come in pieces." Fallon looked down at Grace, then back at him. That almost smile returned, closer this time. "Then I'll sew that tear in your sleeve tonight," she said. He glanced at the frayed seam near his elbow. "Didn't think you noticed." She adjusted Grace in her arms. "I see more than I say." They didn't speak much over supper. Fallon fed Grace first, then took her upstairs to the loft Jasper had cleared that morning, laying her in a cradle he'd once carved from juniper but never used. She came back down and sat across from him at the table, her hands wrapped around the mug he'd filled with chicory coffee. "You don't ask many questions," she said, watching the fire. "You don't offer many answers." She nodded once, like that was fair. Then, quietly, "I left Cheyenne because someone followed me from the boarding house. Man who didn't like hearing no. I waited until he was out drinking, packed what I could carry, and left before sunrise." Jasper's jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. He was the kind who wouldn't stop. "I didn't want him near her." Her voice tightened. "Or me." "You did right." She looked at him then, eyes dark and still. "I'm not looking for someone to save me," she said. "I'm not in the business of saving people," Jasper said. "Just making sure they've got a place to stand." Fallon nodded slowly, then rose and crossed to the hearth. She bent to stoke the fire, her face lit gold in the low light. When she turned, she said, "You got a needle and thread?" "Drawer near the stove." She fetched it without asking, sat beside him, and took his arm gently, turning the sleeve to see the seam. Her fingers were quick, practiced. She didn't speak while she worked, and neither did he. The only sound was the crackle of flame and the soft scrape of thread through cloth. When she finished, she tied the knot and smoothed the fabric. "There," she said, not looking up. "Better." Jasper didn't move. Fallon set the needle down and finally met his gaze. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "But I'd like to stay through the fall. Maybe the winter too." He nodded once. "Then we'll make room for that," he said. And they sat there, not touching, but closer than they'd been all day, the stitched seam between them warm from her hands. The morning after the first frost, Jasper found Fallon in the lean-to behind the barn, folding strips of muslin over a bundle of dried yarrow. She looked up when he stepped inside, her breath visible in the cold air, and nodded once before returning to her task. "You know your plants," he said, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe. "My mother kept a ledger," she said. "Pressed a sprig next to every entry. Yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, mullein for cough. I read it so many times the pages wore soft. She teach you to use it." Fallon tied the bundle with twine and set it in the crate beside her. She taught me to listen first. Plants'll tell you what they're good for if you've got the patience. Jasper stepped closer, crouching beside the crate. You mean to keep healing folks, if anyone needs it, she said simply. I'm not looking to hang out a sign, just don't want to forget what I know. He nodded, then picked up a bundle and studied it. You've got a good hand for order. Fallon shrugged slightly. I like knowing where things are. They worked together in silence after that, sorting roots and herbs, laying out cloths to dry. Grace was asleep in her cradle back in the cabin, and the quiet between them settled in easy, like it had earned its place. By midday, Fallon stood from the floor and brushed off her skirt. I was thinking about the loft, she said. If we move the trunk to the wall, there's room enough for a second cot. Jasper looked up. You want more space? I want Grace to have space once she starts crawling. She'll need it before long. He stood too, dusting off his trousers. We'll build what she needs, whatever that looks like. She hesitated, then said, I know I'm not your blood, and she's not your kin. You said that already, Jasper said, not harshly. Fallon's eyes met his. Then I need to say something else. I didn't come here planning to stay with a man. I didn't come here planning anything, really. I figured. But I've been watching how you are with her, how you don't turn away when she cries, how you listen even when I say nothing. She folded her arms, fingers curling under her elbows. That's not something I've known before. Jasper stepped forward, slow. You don't owe me anything, Fallon. I know. Her voice was quiet, but I want to offer something back. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to build this together, not just use what's already here. He studied her, then reached for her hand. She let him take it. His thumb traced the edge of her palm, roughened from work. Then we start with the cot, he said. And whatever comes after. That evening, he brought down an old beam from the rafters, and they measured it on the porch by lantern light. Grace sat swaddled in a basket nearby, gurgling softly as her mother and Jasper spoke in low tones over wood and nails and blankets. As they worked, Fallon looked over at him and said, You ever think about what you'd have done if I hadn't walked down that trail? He paused, hammer in hand. Sometimes. And I'd still be here, but it'd be quieter. And colder. Fallon nodded, then knelt to tuck the blanket around Grace again. The baby blinked up at her, then reached toward Jasper. He leaned over, offering his finger. Grace curled her tiny hand around it. Fallon watched the two of them for a long beat. Then she said, I don't know what she'll call you yet, but I want her to grow up knowing you're hers. Jasper looked up. That works both ways. Fallon's eyes welled, though she didn't let the tears fall. I want to trust it, she whispered. Then let's build slow, he said. But sure. She nodded, then stepped closer. They stood quiet, the baby between them, lantern light flickering against the porch timbers. Jasper touched the edge of her sleeve, then her hand, then let it rest there, solid and warm. Fallon didn't move away. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. The cradle they'd built that afternoon stood beside the cot. And outside, the stars hung heavy over the pines. For the first time since Fallon had crossed into the Wyoming Territory, she lay down knowing she wouldn't be asked to leave come morning. Jasper sat beside her, one boot still on, keeping watch with his back against the wall and his gaze on the cradle. Neither of them said it. They didn't need to. They were building something now, and it was holding. The wind had a sharper edge by late October, tugging dry leaves from the cottonwoods and sending them tumbling across the yard. Jasper stood in the barn, oiling the hinges on the stall doors, while Fallon sat at the threshold with Grace in her lap, showing her how to roll a pine cone between tiny hands. The child let out a delighted coo when it tipped over, and Fallon smiled without thinking. She's got her mother's hands, Jasper said, not looking up from his work. Fallon turned her head. You've never seen her father's. I don't need to. She fell quiet, gaze drifting to the golden grass beyond the corral. He owned a pair of ivory-handled pistols, always wore them even to supper. She brushed a curl from Grace's forehead. Said a man who wasn't feared wasn't worth much. Jasper set the oil can down and leaned on the stall rail. That what you believed back then? I was 17 when I met him. Belief didn't come into it. He was older, louder, and I mistook that for strength. You see it different now, she nodded once. Quiet's harder to fake. Jasper stepped out into the light, wiping his hands on a cloth. You ever think about what you want to be next? Fallon looked up at him. You mean now that survival isn't the only plan? That's about what I mean. She stood, one arm under Grace, and walked toward him. I've been thinking about teaching her to read myself. Then maybe other children too, if folks around here would trust me enough. They will, he said. You sound sure. Because they'll see what I do. She studied him, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he waited without urgency. And what do you see? Someone who doesn't flinch from hard things. Someone who could build a life steady as a fence line if given the space. Fallon stepped closer, so near now that the baby's blanket brushed Jasper's coat. I've lived so long on someone else's land or in someone else's rules, I forgot what space felt like. You've got it here, he said, and I'll hold it for you long as you need. She looked down, then back up. You still mean it, that it doesn't matter who she is? Jasper reached out and touched the edge of Grace's blanket. His voice didn't lift, didn't waver. I mean it more now than I did the day you asked. The baby yawned, small mouth open wide, and Fallon shifted her weight, pressing her close. Jasper watched her arms tighten, and the tenderness of that motion reached something deep and steady in him. I never saw a man hold to his word past the first trouble, she said. But you're still here, quiet as ever, solid as ever, and I keep waiting for you to change. I'm not planning to. I believe you, she said. That night, they sat on the porch while Grace slept in her cradle, the lantern between them casting soft light across the cedar floorboards. Fallon had taken to mending Jasper's shirts without asking now, setting the needlework beside her when she broke for supper. He didn't comment on it, only wore them like he always had. Tell me something from before, Fallon said, staring out into the dark. From before you landed here. Jasper leaned back in the chair. I once spent 6 straight weeks driving cattle through the Palo Duro Canyon. Dust thick as smoke, sky so wide it made you feel like a speck. Whole time I kept thinking I'd never want a place of my own, wanted to keep riding till I disappeared. And yet here you are. He looked over at her. Turns out I was wrong. She turned her head too, chin resting on one hand. What changed? One winter I got snowed in outside Laramie. Holed up in a sod house with a man and his wife. She lost a child the year before, and she still set a place for her at the table, every night. I watched him pour her coffee, hold her hand, never say a word about the empty chair. Jasper's voice went quiet. I realized then, I didn't want to be a man who left when the wind shifted. I wanted to be the one who stayed. Fallon didn't speak for a long time. Then she reached out, her hand finding his between the chairs. Her fingers were cool from the night air. He closed his around them. Are you staying, Fallon? He asked. I'm not going anywhere, Jasper. Their joined hands rested on the armrest, and neither of them moved to let go. Grace stirred once inside, then settled again. I never expected any of this, Fallon said at last, her voice soft. Not the safety, not the peace, not you. I didn't expect you either, he said, but I'm not letting go of what's been given. She looked toward the cabin, then toward him. Then let's keep building. He nodded, thumb brushing across the back of her hand. We will. And with that, the wind rose again, but it didn't feel cold. Not anymore. The first snow came soft and heavy, blanketing the pasture and roofline while the sky still glowed with morning. Jasper stepped outside with a pail for water and paused on the porch, boots crunching in the powder. The quiet was thick, broken only by the lowing of the cow from the barn and the creak of the wind in the pine boughs. Inside, Fallon stoked the fire with one hand and held Grace in the crook of the other arm, murmuring a tune as she tucked the quilt tighter around her. The baby had grown rounder, her eyes more alert, watching the flames crackle with a solemnity that made Fallon laugh under her breath. Jasper came in with snow on his shoulders and set the pail down near the stove. "She's got a look about her," he said, brushing his coat sleeve off. "Like she's ready to question everything." "She'll need that," Fallon said. "Questioning's what kept us moving." Jasper crouched by the hearth, warming his hands. "You think she'll remember this?" "No," Fallon said, shifting Grace to her other arm. "But I will. Every part of it." She didn't say more, but Jasper caught the way her voice tightened just slightly. The cabin had become something more than shelter. It was a life she'd never been offered before. He saw it in the way she moved through the space now, unhurried, like she belonged to it. After breakfast, Jasper cleared the path to the barn, and Fallon set to mending the last of the curtains they'd hung in the loft. The day passed quiet, filled with the sounds of wood splitting, iron clanking, and Grace's babble woven through. That evening, Jasper brought down a folded piece of paper from the narrow shelf above his bed. "I wrote something," he said, handing it to her. "Wasn't sure I would." Fallon sat on the edge of the cot, Grace asleep upstairs. She unfolded the page slowly. It was a deed. Handwritten, witnessed, and signed by the county clerk, her name clear beside his. "I put your name on the land," he said, "and the cabin. I wanted you to see it before I sent it to be filed." Fallon's hand trembled slightly as she held the paper. "You didn't ask me." "No," he said. "Because I didn't want you to feel like it was a question. I wanted you to know there's no condition to it." She stared at the paper a long time before folding it again. "You're giving me half your life," she said. He sat beside her. "You gave me the rest of mine, Fallon." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "We didn't speak vows." "Not out loud," Jasper said, brushing his fingers against hers. "But I think we've been speaking them every day." Fallon looked down at their hands. "I never thought I'd have this, not with a man. Not without fear." "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. "Not now. Not ever." She leaned into him then, slow and certain, her head resting against his chest. Jasper wrapped his arm around her, pressing his nose to her hair. They stayed like that while the fire crackled low, and the snow continued to fall beyond the windows. That spring, Fallon planted a row of beans behind the barn and started teaching the neighbors' 2 children their letters at the kitchen table on Saturdays. Word spread quiet but steady, and by summer she had 5 students, 2 from the nearby homestead, 3 from farther out. Jasper built a small lean-to for her herbs, and every morning she'd go out barefoot before breakfast and tend the rows, whispering to the leaves as the sun crept over the trees. Grace took her first steps near the corral, arms outstretched toward a straw-bristled broom she was determined to catch. They married beneath the cottonwood in late July, with only the tall grass and the wind as their witnesses. Fallon wore a blue ribbon Jasper had found in town. He wore the same coat he'd worn that first day she arrived. Afterward, they shared bread and jam on the porch, watching Grace chase a chicken through the yard. Jasper reached for her hand, and Fallon laced her fingers through his without looking away from their daughter. "You never asked me what I wanted most," she said. "I didn't need to," Jasper said, "but I'd still like to hear it." "Peace," she said, "and someone who wouldn't leave." He kissed her knuckles one by one. "Well," he said, "you've got both now." She leaned her head against his shoulder and they watched the sun dip low behind the ridge, golden light catching on the edges of the wheat and the curve of Grace's cheek as she laughed. Years passed. quietly, steadily. Grace grew sturdy, always asking questions, always trailing her mama through the garden or sitting beside her papa while he whittled small animals from pine wood. Fallon taught reading and numbers to the children of the valley, and Jasper kept the fences mended and the woodpile full. Their life wasn't grand, but it was theirs built from trust, stitched with work, and rooted in the kind of love that didn't need proving. At night, when the fire was low and the house still, Fallon would rest her hand against the rise of Jasper's chest and whisper, "Still here." And always, always, he'd answer, "Right here." And he always would be.